The WASP were a group of brave women that during World War II gave themselves to the war effort in a way that is truly honorable and selfless. Those with pilot licenses volunteered to serve our country. At the time, the country was running short of male pilots, so the women of America stepped up to the challenge, specifically Nancy Harkness Love. Before the sudden change of heart by the U.S. Army, Nancy wrote to the Ferrying Division of the Armed Air Forces with an idea. The proposal was to hire female pilots to ferry military aircraft, freeing up any male pilot for combat overseas, thereby helping the shortage of fighter pilots. But the Army was not yet ready for this change. To them, women did not belong in the cockpit. However, after floundering for a little longer, the leaders of Air Transport Command remembered Nancy's proposal and hired her to recruit 25 of the best female pilots to get the job done. They were called the Women's Auxiliary Ferry Squadron, or the WAFS. By September 14, 1942, General Arnold approved a program to train more women to serve as ferry pilots. They were to be called the Women's Flying Training Detachment, or the WFTD.
I am a WASP, Women's Air Force Service Pilot. I was born in Canada of American parents and took all my early training in the province of Manitoba. At that time I heard about the WASP organization, but I had three problems. I was too young. I was 19 instead of being 21. I was a quarter of an inch short, and I could not get a license in Canada at that time. Canada went to war in 1939, and this was the early 1940s. Interesting to note that 25,000 women in 1942 applied to get into the WASP organization. All had to be licensed pilots before they went in. They took the same course as the cadets did that were learning to fly for the war. World War II opened up a lot of opportunities for women, but in this case, 25,000 applied, 1,800 were accepted, and 1,074 actually graduated.
And together with the original 28 WAFS, they became the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP. In less than 2 years, WASP flew 60 million miles in every type of aircraft in the Army Air Force arsenal, from the fastest fighters to the heaviest bombers. The WASP flew every type of mission any Army Air Force male pilot flew during World War II, except combat. Life in the Army wasn't so simple, though. The members of WASP were treated like any other man in the Army. So were Cass Lucille Wise, an original WASP member. We were trained the military way. Just like the male cadets we trained, said Wise. We lived in barracks, we slept on metal cots, and we learned to march, and we were under military discipline, under demerits. We had to make our beds a certain way, and we had inspections. It was very stressful, because we had to meet the requirements. In a time where women were treated as the weaker, more docile sex, women everywhere started to step up, especially those mighty WASPs. To paint this picture a bit more clearly, the commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, Henry Hap Arnold, even changed his tune after watching the WASPs grow. He had started off being very uncertain of the prospects of hiring female pilots to do the jobs generally given to men, but by 1944 he himself stated that it is on the record that women can fly as well as men. Though the WASPs are respected now, they weren't for a very long time. In fact, they were forgotten almost immediately after the war. Their program was cut short and shut down due to the war being near its end. After that, there was no glory to be had by any of the WASP members. Even those who died for their country were not honored properly. Being that they were citizens, the military was not required to pay for a funeral, or even for the remains of those who died to be sent home. It was left to the WASP to deal with that. And that they did. They collected and scrounged the money to ship their fellow pilots home, which was usually by train. Aside from that, The women of WASP just went on there with their lives, never talking about their experiences again. Until the Air Force came out with the groundbreaking news in 1976 they were going to admit women to their flying program. But what truly made the blood of the WASP women boil was a statement by the Air Force that said, "It's the first time the Air Force has allowed women to fly their aircrafts." They had been forgotten by their own Air Force that had brought together these women in the first place. In response to this, the former members of WASP gathered together and lobbied Congress. It wasn't until they managed to persuade Senator Barry Goldwater, who was a fellow pilot, that they got some headway. And then, in 1977, the WASPs had finally achieved it. They were granted military status. Their message might have been a bit delayed, but these brave women proved that they could do what any man could do, even if their route was first paved by cautious doubts.
The program was experimental. They weren't sure in those days whether a woman could fly military aircraft, whether or not they could adapt to the military life. And so it was an experiment. We were treated as military. When we graduated and got our wings, we were treated as military. We had to learn military protocol. We were given military orders. We made friends, and we stayed friends through the years. We still meet, still have reunions, and you just feel a closeness having shared something in life. I guess it's probably something similar to a sorority. All you have to do is to go up in a small airplane the first time, and you're bound to fall in love with flying. You have the freedom, you have the beauty of the sky, you have the ground underneath. It looks like little railroad tracks, little toy railroad tracks, little toy people. It's just a very exhilarating and free feeling. After 65 or so years, to finally be recognized. For some reason, there are not too many details in the history books about the WASP. Most people, you say, do you know what a WASP is? And besides saying a bug, they say no. They did not realize that there were women who were flying military aircraft in World War II, and we were the first ones to do that.
They were the first women in American history to fly military aircraft. Despite the doubts of others that loomed overhead, they stuck to their guns and voluntarily put their lives on the line to prove that they could do it. That they were just as strong, just as smart, and just as brave as any man.